Hello, everyone. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Barry.
Good
Welcome
morning.
to the Yellow Book Road podcast.
Oh, I'm
Uh,
following the yellow brick road. This is good.
The
I
Yellow
always
Book
wanted to.
Road. Yes. And
Yes.
in our pre-conversation, we're gonna all be slightly tired. This is being recorded the day after the most amazing football week ever. And unfortunately, we have a Buffalo Bills fan here.
Uh,
Barry, my condolences, but you have something exciting to look forward to for many years. So enjoy it.
as a Bills fan of 50 plus years, you start asking yourself, are they ever going to win one of these things in my lifetime or not? Maybe
It
Patriots fans went through that 20 years ago.
Exactly. We did. And now I don't know, Wendy, how you feel. I'm on the other side. So it's like we've had so much success that it's like it's actually fun again to watch sports and not like have that live or die feeling. So it will happen, Barry. It will happen.
Okay.
So today we're going to be talking about bordereaux, the past, the present, and the future. So why don't we do quick introductions? Wendy, you go
Sure.
first. Who are you? And what do you do? And then Barry.
Okay. My name is Wendy Aarons-Corman. I'm the CEO of a company called OWIT Global. We are an insurance solutions provider. We focus on extending legacy systems because of the number of investments that people have made. We provide solutions that extend those legacies, front ends, rating, doc gen, integration, variety of different components. And we also we have a solution that solves the bordereaux management problem in the industry as well.
Barry?
All right. Yeah. Barry Bablin, 35 years of experience with American National Insurance in a variety of roles, but my current role is in a pricing role, and that's in our specialty markets division. And our specialty markets division deals predominantly with the MGA world of bordereaux and data transfer for the actuarial data that I work with every day, every month and so forth. So that's where I come to this. Bordereau was a brand new thing to me 3-4 years ago, and now I feel like I'm kind of knee deep in Bordereau and feeling a lot of the pain of the things that we're going to talk about here shortly.
Yeah. And that's why, Barry, we thought you'd be the perfect person because in your role, you as a carrier, you have reinsurance relationships where there's a bordereau relationship, but you also have
Correct.
American National does a lot of program business. So
Correct.
your ability to communicate with MGAs is critically important. So I'm going to start out. Bordereau, for those that don't know, is French for I quit. That's it.
It feels like that
That's a good
might be
one.
an apropos definition.
That's a
at
really good
times.
one.
That is tip the waiters. The veal is very good. No, those are the I'll try to end with that joke. That'll be my one and only. But for those that don't know, bordereau is a French term. I think it's French for like stamping or report, right? And it's a report. It's literally a French term for a report. And the reporting that we're talking about is essentially distribution or capacity talking to capacity. It's basically a monthly, quarterly report that says, here's the business we wrote, here's the premium we got, here are the claims that were filed. It's to keep everybody up to date. So with that said, Wendy, I'm going to start out with you. As a technologist coming in, right?
Yes.
So as a technologist coming in, you've probably had quite a bit of experience with how companies report to one another. Talk a little bit from your experience coming in, seeing a bordereau, and you're probably like, bordereau, what is that? You learn what that is. I want your opinion as a technologist and what you're seeing and how you've had to build bordereau reporting into your platforms. Talk about some of the technicalities of bordereau reporting.
Well, it's interesting. I first learned about the Bordereau problem when I was before OWIT. So before I joined OWIT, or we started OWIT, I was working as a contractor for a very large binding authority company, right? And so this company was buying other companies. They were constantly buying MGAs and they were growing and growing and growing. So I was a contractor who came in to take a look at the processes that they had to support, because now they have all these MGAs and people are using different policy systems, or they have different, underwriting groups, different processing groups. And so we were looking at the process of the mergers and acquisitions, and do you create one big system, and how do you solve for the longer term? And one of the things that I learned about was Bordereau, because they were working with the London market, or in some instances with US carriers who were providing them this capacity, and they were having to do these reports. And so when I first sat down with the support team on creating these bordereaux, which they were doing monthly, as you had said, Nick, on a monthly basis, I learned that they were taking data from different systems, putting it into an Excel spreadsheet. And this is from the MGA side, by the way. So putting in different spreadsheets, having lots of missing data, running around, talking to people, filling in the gaps. And this report, which was once a month, would take someone, 2 weeks to put together. And that was a good month, right? And they were doing this all over the company. And they were doing it, every MGA they're acquiring was basically doing it the same way. Now, there were some MGAs who had some, technology built where they would extract the data out of the database to create these bordereaux. But the data they had a lot of data integrity issues. So that's how I learned about the Bordereau. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe no one has solved this problem, right? Because the whole industry was so heavily focused on policy, billing, and claims, policy, billing, and claims, right? So, so with OWIT, what we did was we ended up, ended up acquiring another company who had a Bordereau solution built into their policy solution. And so what we ended up doing was creating a brand new system that basically replicated that, but we started to build upon, the IP that was in there, right? So it was the consumption of all different file types, the cleansing of that data, the external data verification that might need to take place. In some instances, people needed to re-rate it. The logging of the errors, the correction of the errors, and then the transformation of that data over to a format where a system can consume it and understand it, right? So if you have an operational data store, a policy system, GL system, whatever that might be. So that's when we sort of embarked on this, we're going to solve this problem. And while people were still having the problem, they weren't necessarily still not paying attention to the way they were doing it. It wasn't necessarily people were out looking for Bordereau, right? So anyway, fast forward now 4 years. So in a way, Barry and I are kind of running in parallel, because he's learning about Bordereaux over the last 4 years, and so have I. We've learned more and more about the Bordereau problem. It is so much bigger than when we just say, I collect a report. It's so much bigger because you have contract management, where you have to know if you're receiving data from an MGA, have they exceeded their contract?
Authority, correct.
Right, exactly. So that type of thing. So we built that into the system, right? And then on the other side, as Barry can talk about, there's the reporting into the reinsurer as well. So there's that whole ecosystem. So this is kind of where we started. And I can talk about the bigger picture in terms of the whole ecosystem and what I think in terms of the whole data exchange, as you, I think we had talked about in a prior conversation about, the bigger picture about its data exchange.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't matter if it's Bordereau or anything else. We should talk a little bit about that, because I think that's eventually where we're going to get to from as an industry. But that's kind of that's what we are. I think from a Bordereau perspective, people are beginning to understand a lot of data integrity issues. How do I fix it on the front end so that I'm not fixing it in the back end? And Barry can tell you what he probably needs to do to fix the data. And so that's where we are as an organization and technology.
I'm getting anxiety just listening to you, honestly, because there's Barry was anything Wendy said wrong about what you see,
No,
right?
yeah, I mean, no, she hit it pretty well dead on, at least from the world that I live in, that it's still a very manual process. We get in our process here at American National, we're getting now probably excess of 200 Bordereaux files a month, but they're coming in Excel spreadsheets, they're coming in a text fthere's
PDF,
PDFs occasionally, so all kinds of formats.
camera
And,
picture, like
and there's a tremendous amount of friction that comes with taking that information, getting it downstream into your financial reporting systems. As I've looked at this challenge, a couple of things that come immediately to mind. So we here attempt to put that data into what amounts to a dated policy admin system. Really, when I think about what really needs to happen, that business has already been rated. It's already, it's gone through that already. What I really need, I don't really need a policy admin system. I need a really good way to get data from these files into my financial reporting, my internal company data warehouse, so that I can process financials, which is, sort of always takes top billing in a carrier role, because the train's got to leave the station. I got to process financial reporting every month. But more and more folks in my shoes that are being told by their management, hey, we had a bad month last month. What happened? That answer doesn't lie in necessarily the financial reporting data elements. It lies in the other data elements that are not a part of financial reporting. And because they're not a part of financial reporting, there hasn't been an emphasis on, hey, is this stuff accurate? Do we have is there good data? Can I make decisions from this? And that's what I've been preaching internally here in regards to, hey, if you want me to do my job well, we got to have a process that allows us to really, so take me out of the position of trying to shoot blindly, because that's what I feel like I do today.
Yeah. And this is why we're having this conversation, because this is, to me, this is a leverageable element, workflow, right? Barry, right? You have lots of program business. I've created a handful of programs. I don't recall in all of my program business ever having conversations about bordereaux until the program was either on the verge of being instituted, right? So it's like, this is such an important topic, but we don't talk about it. And it's like the last thing on almost everybody's mind is you're actually writing live business and you're like, oh shit, right? They're asking for a bordereaux. We have to go figure this out. It's almost it's an afterthought.
It becomes an afterthought. It really does. I mean, I live that, I can give you examples of just in the last 90 days when that's occurred. When you're looking at new programs and everyone's excited, hey, we've got a new revenue source coming on. It's new business coming in the door. And we don't internally, and I have to believe, American National is not unlike other carriers. You don't press the question, all right, how do I want to manage this business? How am I going to react to, when the business goes south, or I've got a result that was an unanticipated result? How am I going to, put myself in a position to get answers to things that I need to get in? How do I steer the ship?
Or worse,
you're trying to steer the ship without,
or worse, fraud, right? Or worse, right?
Or worse, correct.
The Wendy, the whole system is potentially set up to, what's the incentive around a lot of these elements, given where we are today? To Barry's point, if there are guidelines and those guidelines aren't being met and bordereaux are an afterthought, it's pretty easy to hide stuff.
Oh, without a doubt, Nick. I mean, because the MGA in many cases is not bearing the risk, we need to put ourselves in a position where, hey, I can hold them accountable. The old concept, trust but verify. The verify part becomes difficult. It is difficult today. And we struggle, like I'm sure many carriers are struggling with, hey, if I'm in a world where I'm looking at business written in the excess and surplus market, so it's not admitted business, you don't have necessarily filed rates, but you've got maybe a contractual agreement to charge X cents per hundred on a piece of property,
or
you need to be able to
aggregates.
validate it. Yeah.
You've exceeded your aggregates, or
Correct.
you're about to exceed your aggregate, or you wrote in a zip code you weren't supposed to write in.
Correct.
Like that kind of stuff. So I think we could spend the whole time beating a dead horse on that.
Yes.
I'm hoping the audience will allow us a pass on beating this dead horse, because we could, between what Wendy has seen and I have seen and Barry has seen, we could just go on and on and on. It's just bad practice. So Wendy, I want to go back to you again. I want to go from, this is how we've done it, and this is how we're currently doing it, and in a large part, right? I want to transition to best practice, given a lot of the limitations in technology stacks and all of that. From a technologist standpoint, from someone who has built platform and worked with hundreds, if not thousands of insurance stakeholders around this stuff. If you were advising a company, let's not say sell, but just advising a company, how would you advise them on best practices when it comes to data integrity and reporting? How can a company think about where to start and where they want to go? Just again, given all of the constraints where they might be dealing with stakeholders that also can't do best practice, how should an entity that needs to generate a bordereau think about best practice?
So we're talking about the entity that's generating the bordereau,
Yes.
or the one that's consuming the bordereau?
Let's start with generating, because I think the one consuming is one step away. If we can get all of the entities in the world that are generating to move towards best practice, that's a huge movement for the receiver of that.
Right. Well, here's the thing. So I don't really know if we can get people to move to best practices, and I'll tell you why. And I'm talking about on the, like, for example, the MGA sending data to the carrier. All right. Maybe the carrier to the reinsurer, maybe, and we can kind of, and maybe the TPA to the carrier. But the issue we have is we have lots and lots of systems, policy admin systems that have either been built or bought, that people are taking advantage of, especially if you're an MGA. You might not necessarily go off and look to replace anything or invest a lot of money into your technology, right? And so we have MGAs that are generating files for the carriers that they think they can get out of their system, right? Every carrier goes to an MGA and says, okay, we're going to do business with you. We're going to give you capacity for this product. This is what I want you to have your bordereau look like. Here's my template, right? And does that ever happen? Does the MGA take it and generate that template? Maybe. But really what happens is the MGA generates a template, and they might have a process that gets the data out, and they send it to the carrier. Okay. And as Barry said, they're not as much of a stakeholder. So it's a very different thought process to get the data out. Okay. And so what happens is the carrier says, okay, this isn't right. There's 5 data fields that are wrong, goes back to the MGA. And there's this loop that goes back and forth, that, continuous loop that costs the carrier and the MGA money till we get some fixed data. And that can take beyond the month of closing out the books. Right. And so that's it. So when you talk about best practices on the MGA side, the best practice for them is to be able to send whatever they can, right, in the format that they have to the carrier, and for the carrier to potentially be able to consume any type of format that comes in. I mean, you heard Barry say PDF, fixed file, Excel spreadsheets. Some of those spreadsheets are multi-tabbed. They're all different types of formats. And so if we didn't have to worry about the format of the data, I'm not talking about the incompleteness of the data should always be complete, right? If we didn't have to worry about the formats and we could somehow consume those formats and push those formats into what we need them to be, that to me would be the best practice, is that central location of transformation, right? Because we just are not going to get the industry to change over the way that they necessarily do things after they've invested in that.
Sure. But I want to push back a little bit because
Okay.
it's I still don't understand why if American National or anyone that's requesting a particular template, we need the data into this format, right? I'm confused as to why MGAs can't build workflows and protocols to satisfy that, right? Like even if they have a legacy tech stack, right? Wendy, wouldn't you say that even with a little bit of investment, they should have workflows and processes that can still say, okay, we know we have a problem here. Our system can only output this other stuff. And I'm of the belief that if it requires them hiring some people to query things and pull it out and put it into a separate database or a separate Excel spreadsheet, I almost feel like that's the best practice. Like you still have to honor your contract and fulfill the timelines, because you could be delivering a powder keg over to them. And so even though I know it can't turn overnight, I think even MGAs with antiquated systems can still execute and fill out the template. I'm confused as to why it still can't be done.
Yeah, so I'm not saying it can't be done. What I'm saying is whether it will get done, right? That's the difference in Nick.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
I would.
So then I want to try to get to like, let's assume it can be done. Like if we could crack a whip and get them to do that.
Well, you could crack the whip, tell everybody you want to use the Accord standards, and and people don't use the Accord standards. They use their own standard. I mean, that's kind of where I'm getting at. I'm getting at to the point where I think that, this whole concept of having a central location to consume, cleanse, and transform data is the answer to the issue here. And that's what we have been working on in the industry and trying to get people to understand, because while we could ask our MGAs to do this, the real process is marketing goes out and they make a deal, right? And Barry knows they make a deal, and someone in IT might say, I need this to be in this format, and marketing will say, okay, I'll give it to them, and they give it to them. But when the train starts rolling, the format is whatever the MGA has generally, and there's usually no pushback at that point. I'm not saying that people can't change and say, okay, I have ANPAC, I have
here's a whole host of carriers that they're dealing with.
Say, right, I have to do, every carrier is going to have their own template and their own, requirements. And that means that every MGA has to change their requirements to meet every single one of those carriers, right? And I'm not saying they can't, they can. It's just whether or not, that's going to happen. That's why being able to connect, for example, having that central location that connects everyone to each other and grabs data where it needs to be grabbed and cleanses the data and pushes data, so supplier receiver is what I think is the best practice for the industry.
That best practice really could go a long way towards removing a lot of the friction that comes with onboarding and offboarding an MGA. I mean, we've said internally as a team, hey, our picture on the wall is the ability to onboard an MGA, in 90 days. Marketing makes a deal. Hey, we're going to take a piece of program business, and in 90 days, I want to be, my system's all ready and up and running and ready to go. And in a world like Wendy you're describing, that's feasible. If you had a level of standardization where, hey, onboarding, it's the same record layout, largely the same elements that are there, that would be something that from a carrier perspective, that would be highly preferential. Now, why hasn't it got there? The MGAs are not there. At least that what I see. They've got a ways to go. Many times you're dealing with a TPA that's doing the IT work for an MGA. So when you talk directly to the MGA, more often than not, you're not talking directly with their IT staff. So there's so much gets lost in translation. And to your point, commitments are made. We're ready to go ahead and write business. And as I said earlier, inevitably what happens is, hey, I got to process financial statements. So if a data element that involves financial statements, premiums, largely the financial fields, there's a lot more attention paid there. But the other non-financial statement entries, more often than not, what happens is, hey, you got 4 days to fix it before the system's got to refresh and has to run. And if you're anything like what my world is those folks that are doing that processing, they're barely trying to keep their head above water. And more often than not, what happens is none of that stuff gets corrected. What has to get corrected does, but what would be preferential, and certainly as the actuary looking at this, those key data elements that help me manage the business, if they're not financial entries, more often than not, they don't get resolved.
Yeah.
Especially if there's a considerable number of them.
Yeah. And it's not that, I know you're looking for best practices, Nick, but I feel like it's a very, it's a hard thing to grab.
Yeah, your Accord example resonated with me because I was gonna like stomp my feet and just like, come on, Wendy, give me some best practices. But you're right, like even in application related stuff, it's all busted and broken, and we can't make sense of it. So Barry, as you're describing that, I'm thinking of the poor chaps that are counting the hours down before, the book closes or whatever, and having to work like a 14-hour day because
just
a bunch of MGAs were late delivering this stuff, and they had to be run through models and stuff like that. And their problem becomes your problem.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. And that honestly, like that pisses me off. Like,
well, you're like, as the actuaries, we're huge stakeholders, but I don't own the process. And oftentimes, Nick, what happens is I get an MGA, their data file is bad, or there's an issue. Many times we'll just hold it, and you'll miss a month. Which is
right.
Oh, we didn't get this one. Why do financials look funny this month? Oh, MGA 123 has essentially a zero entry. There's no records there. Well, their data file was problem. So we held it this month. We're going to double it up next month. And 3 years later, when you're doing a retrospective review, you're like, what happened there? Boy, you're looking at any kind of particular trends or something like that, and you see that kind of thing that happened. You wind up, unfortunately, we get a lot more of those than I care to admit to. And that causes all kinds of consternation all the way up the chain as you're looking at financials.
For you delivering to your reinsurer, it makes it impossible for us to actually run our businesses. And I will tell you, Barry, there are probably a lot of MGAs that complain as well. And like they're at the starting point of this, right? So
sure.
A lot of it comes down to them. So Barry, I'd like to, before we make like a little pivot segue here, from your standpoint, right? Like, when MGAs are crafting their business plan to talk about competitive advantage, right? Wouldn't it be a competitive advantage
to be able to onboard, offboard for sure?
To secure a fronting company, a capacity provider, wouldn't it look attractive to be able to illustrate to them a tech stack that says we can deliver any template format you need and we can do it on time? Wouldn't you be more willing to give even more capacity or do entertain more
certainly
interesting structures.
it would make you as a carrier look certainly more attractive to a potential MGA partnerships when you have that
Both
kind of
ways.
structure. Yeah, both
Both
when
ways.
you have that kind of structure in place. Yep.
So like I'm thinking from the MGA standpoint, because that's my ballpark.
It removes that friction that comes with changing. You know, when you go
but
to
doesn't it add credibility? Like, wouldn't you look at MGA that can like solve that problem for you? Like, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah,
wouldn't you be
tells
thinking
hey,
like
these guys
they
are
got
in the
their
business.
act together?
They got their act together. They're in the business. They know how to run a clean shop, as opposed to, you know, some of these ones that, you know, you hear a lot of talk, and then when you actually get down to it, there are a lot of antiquated, you know, systems technology behind the scenes, and just throwing manual efforts at dealing with some of those problems.
Yeah.
So for sure, yeah.
Because that friction shows up in the combined ratio over time.
Correct.
Right. That's
over time. It'd be hard to. It's the reason why probably this doesn't get as much traction as because it's hard to pinpoint that. But you do know intuitively that, you know, that friction's going to cost me money somewhere in the form of expense, and probably cost me in the form of poor loss results because, hey, I couldn't steer the ship in the direction I needed to because, hey, I didn't get the information timely to be able to make the changes that I needed to.
Yeah, I'm 2 months behind. I'm 3 months behind. We ended up finding out a quarter later that they were writing in a zip code they shouldn't have been writing in.
Correct.
Or they had already exceeded capacity limits. To me, this gets to the credibility of the MGA in being able to show their stakeholders, their carrier partners, their reinsurance partners, and say, we got our act together, not just in this underwriting thing that we've been pitching to you, but we got our act together on the technical side. So we're not going to burn precious margin on the backside, having you have to hire a whole bunch of staff to manage the garbage that we're delivering back to you.
Yeah, no, you got it spot on.
But here's the thing. So just to comment on that, we have provided demonstrations for reinsurers for our MGAs to show them our technology and how we provide Bordereau to outgoing from an MGA, right? And that's been part of the process of getting the capacity for the MGA, right? To Nick's point, we've had to do that. But on the other side of it, you know, we don't get like, you know, I don't think that happens a lot in the terms of people asking to see. I don't know about the carriers versus the reinsurers. I don't know if they're different in how they go about it. Barry, you might know more so.
From what perspective, Wendy?
Well, whether they're really more in tune to the process of receiving claims in Bordereau, right? But what I was going to say is, you know, that I don't think people understand what the effort is to receive the data.
The level of friction that exists in the system.
That's the problem. They don't understand the friction. So it's not on the table. It's not at the forefront of the conversation of how are you going to get me a clean set of data every month? Because, you know, we do ROI evaluations for our prospects so that they can understand what they're actually putting, you know, money into, you know, on their back end to deal with all of this data. They have no idea, right? And so I think that's the biggest issue is
it's quietly sort of hidden costs. There's a lot of people friction and hidden costs that come with it that are not always as easily like identified. So when people that are in positions to make decisions on these things, they see the, they see the dollar figure on potentially on a system or on a process, but they fail to recognize the frictional costs that come with, you know, what we deal with every month, you know, let alone the longer term costs for, like we said, hey, that experience is going to be marginally poorer because you just didn't have the ability to turn the ship when you needed to because, hey, I didn't see the data in time. I couldn't identify that trend timely because I don't have the data clean to be able to make those decisions.
Yeah,
I think people don't get it. They don't understand it.
Well, no, I mean, Wendy, I think it's an afterthought, right? So at the end of the day, all up and down the ecosystem, it's, I think we're all probably guilty of this in one way or another. Barry, when I'm evaluating a program, I'm going down a checklist of like, okay, what's your underwriting competitive edge? What's your distribution competitive edge? And there's almost an assumption that it's just like, yeah, there'll be some technology, right? Like it's almost like we have to change that piece of it and say the lack of technology will be very indicative of whether you can actually execute on that underwriting edge, whether you can execute on that distribution edge. Because to me, if you can't get the report together, where else? Like if you can't enrich the data or get it in a row or a column to deliver it to someone in the time that they want it, where else is the technology a cockroach infesting some element of the underwriting that's ultimately going to show up in the loss ratio?
Well, I like I said earlier, I've only been at this for a few years, but looking at the way we handle this internally, and I have to believe most carriers, this is a process that's been the same for probably 40 years. I mean, it's just, hey, you're getting, maybe it went from paper to electronic, but outside of that, it really hasn't, you really haven't tied those systems together. I mean, in the perfect world, I push a button every month and this information flows through automated processes and voila, my data warehouse is populated. I've got the information ready to go for financial reporting. So, all of that friction is gone. Yeah, there's some work to do to get there. But I mean, I look at the way the process works today, it's probably the same as it was 50 years ago.
Yeah. We have been, for the most part, analog companies trying to digitize.
Yes.
Right. Yep. And what this needs, and where the technologists that have come in on InsurTech that have looked at the cross section of our workflow are just like, how can you possibly operate like that? This is actually a no-brainer process wise. Like technologically, this is table stakes. In retail and finance, like this, they've got most of this solved. Data just flows, and we're analog world. So Barry, you said in an ideal world, I want to kind of finish up there, because to me, we're not done, even if we get to solving some of the things that we talked about, because as we talked about before I hit record, I'm not sure the bordereaux is actually necessary. Like in an ideal world, they're just securitized dashboards, and data is just moving like on the bind. Someone is notified,
flows all the way.
It's accumulating, right? Like it's like you as the carrier. So Barry, ideal world for me is I am operating and you can see whatever you want to see at any moment.
Real time. Exactly.
You may choose not to see, because you may be like, oh, real time is, I don't have time to see how many submissions you're getting and what your hit rate is. But to me, that's the ideal state, is that we deliver a seamless flow of data to portal, API, it doesn't matter. And you as the receiver of that, pick and choose what you want. And at the push of a button, you get data that flows into your modeling systems, data that flows into your ledgers, stuff like that.
You remove that reporting lag. A big component of the MGA world is the reporting lag that you don't have if you're a direct writer, like, and the other arm of the American National business, they don't have this kind of reporting lag. I mean, this reporting lag in my world, it's 60 to 90 days. I'm not hearing about the business that's transacted. Today is late January. I'm only going to hear at the end of this month about what happened in November. So you're always 60 to 90 days behind.
Right.
In some future state, like you say, you maybe not real time, but you're getting daily, weekly uploads. So you can see, to your point earlier, because this is, I've lived this here. Hey, your thresholds, I'm trying to manage my cat exposure countrywide. And all of a sudden, I've got an uptick in business in a particular location where, hey, I don't want any more of that business. And yet I can't turn that spigot off because,
Mhm.
hey, you still got 90 days worth of pipeline that's already there now
Yeah.
that you're going to have to deal with first. So yeah, that's a really good point now.
Yeah. And
And-
I'm just gonna talk a little bit about that on the technology side. So, so with the, advancement of data exchange, right? You're right, Nick, the Bordereau management side is it's just the very beginning, right? So that we're talking, if you think about it, years ago, Ivans was there to transfer data between the agent and the carrier to get quotes, right? So it was a
Mhm.
little bit of advancement there, in the early days, and you had to subscribe to that. But it was pretty much agent to carrier, and you had to pick a horse. You picked
Mhm.
Ivan. I forget what the other one was, whether the other one, there was another one. There was maybe an AMS one. So the Bordereau piece, as we talked about, was that, it's like that in the back end, nobody was really paying attention to it. Everybody paid attention to the front end. So that's why Ivans did so well. And so from a Bordereau perspective, we need to think in terms of real time, right? So now we're not worrying about waiting every month. You can consume data on a real time basis to, to cleanse it and transform it. Okay, that's that part. But the bigger piece, I mean, as we begin to grow as an organization, as an industry, and we start to adopt data transformation services, let's call them, it's going beyond Bordereau. Now we're going to branch out, branch out, branch out. So the ecosystem we should get to the point where it's insurance data exchange, not just Bordereau management. Bordereau management becomes a subset of the insurance data exchange. And insurance data exchange will let us get to that more real-time effort of sending data along to our partners, not just for third-party verification. Okay, we already got that going on, but we're talking supplier receiver, which can be, any one of us, right? And then that will allow us eventually to get to this blockchain thing, which I think the insurance industry talks about. But the reality is, until we adopt insurance data exchange and insurance data transformation, so that you can talk one language to me and I can understand your language after I transform your language to my language, right? Automatically. Until we get there, those types of things can't play.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, listen, there'll be a lot of people that poo-poo blockchain. It doesn't have to be blockchain. Barry, back to the ideal state, what Wendy just talked about, that technology exists. It can be blockchain. It doesn't have to be blockchain.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of smart contracts, right? Like legitimately carrier MGA, carrier reinsurer, where you can essentially codify all of these elements, and now you basically can't break the rules. Like in real time, you can see
it becomes an industry standard.
Yeah,
it
my bucket of Miami-Dade exposure is well known to all of the stakeholders that need to know what that is, and they will be notified if it gets to not the critical threshold. They will be notified at threshold
at the yellow light.
that.
Yeah, not the red light, but at the yellow light.
Right.
Correct.
And that ultimately, Barry, right? When you think about it, people are going to pull their hair out. I've already lost a lot just in this conversation thinking about bordereaux, but people are going to pull their hair out on the amount of work it's going to take to sort of get to what Wendy is talking about. But in reality, on the other side, it is better for everybody. Like, I think we're talking legitimately several full basis points of reduced friction, because this is beyond the reporting element. If you get this part right, this will enhance your distribution. This will make your underwriting better. This will make reinsurance.
You make better pricing decisions. Yeah, the whole smash. Yep.
Right. Okay. So, man, did we kick that horse really, really well. For those who have stayed on, we have a survey. We would like to collect more information about how this process is being done. It will be anonymized survey. We'll figure out ways to make it worth your while. I'll put that in the show notes around that. But we need to collect some information about this so we can move in this particular direction, because this really does affect everybody in the ecosystem. You could be in marketing, right? And just feel like, oh, that's somebody else's problem. But your inability to get certain coverages, your inability to get certain amounts of capacity, ultimately the friction that comes with this afterthought affects every part of the system. So we ask you, if you're doing anything around Bordereau, to help us fill out the anonymous survey. We will collect it. We will share the information back to you. For those that do fill out the survey, we will give you first glance at the results of the survey as a thank you, and we'll try to figure out some other parting gifts as well for that. But yeah, please help us on this. We're begging you. So Barry, Wendy, thank you so much. And should we have any parting thoughts, or did we beat that one up pretty good?
I think we, go ahead, Wendy.
No, I was going to say, I think we beat up. I mean, as a vendor in the business, everyone has this problem. We have more conversations with more and more people every month. It's just becoming a point of conversation, which I'm appreciative of, because it is a problem that I think we need to solve, because it is the foundation of that bigger insurance data exchange.
Yeah, and that the ability to kind of move this forward into the 21st century, because I kind of feel like this is a process that's still locked in 1970s, 80s, processes, really, that the technology's there to make a quantum leap forward. And I think these kinds of things are going to get us there.
Yeah. This is not reinventing anything. This problem has already been solved. We just have to put the elbow grease in.
To deploy it. It just needs to be deployed. Yep.
Absolutely. Okay. Barry, Wendy, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks,
all right.
Barry.
Thank you, Nick. Yep. Take care, Wendy.